Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 52 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. This week we're speaking with Oscar-nominated screenwriter and co-founder of Pajamas Media, Roger Simon. He's got a really great perspective on Hollywood, as well as some amazing stories from the older days of Hollywood, one including Richard Pryor. This week's show is sponsored by the 2018 Academy Awards telecast, assuming the event has enough scandal-free talent for the show to go on. Before the show begins today, I want to have a quick statement about why there was no show last week. Well, had a technical hiccup pretty bad, and I apologize to the guest in question. I hope to have him back down the road. But boy, that was a severe technical gaffe on my part. I have to say, podcasting has been amazing. I've actually just wrapped my first year being a podcaster, and for the most part, I love it. I love talking to different people. I love sharing my thoughts in this format. I just think it's amazing in so many ways. And the fact that I can do this from my home studio, a.k.a. my office, a.k.a. my basement, it's just amazing. Having said that, boy, is it frustrating. There are new tweaks and problems and things that crop up every other week. It's amazing. It's frustrating. And as much as I'm glad about technology involved, I just don't quite grasp it all the way. So a quick apology to the listeners of the show. I hope not to have any more hiccups in the programming down the road, certainly going into 2018. I do get a little smarter, a little better, maybe even a little sharper as things go on, and I'll get a better grip on the technology. But this is a very humbling format. I love podcasting, but that's the reason why there was no show last week, but hopefully things will be much better here and throughout 2018. But again, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And any feedback, please let me know. You can email me at christian@hollywoodintoto.com. Thanks again. Before my chat with Roger, I wanted to channel my inner Bernie Goldberg to scorch the entertainment press. Why? Well, they deserve it. All right, here's the scene. Lena Dunham. Well, you all know her. Many people maybe don't like her. Perhaps you've enjoyed her show Girls on HBO. Well, that show is over, but she's still in the news every other week. And she was in the news fairly recently for something that I think was not flattering whatsoever. The New York Times broke a story about a week or two ago about the Harvey Weinstein scandal. But more specifically, they looked at how Harvey Weinstein got away with all the things he did. There had to be a network in place, a structure that protected him, that warned him, that allowed him to do all the things he is alleged to have done. Well, as part of that story, we learned that Lena Dunham knew something was afoot in Weinstein's camp. More specifically, as she dubbed it, he was a rapist. And she knew this information, and she shared it. Not with the news, not with her fellow stars, but with the Hillary Clinton campaign. Yes, in 2016, Lena Dunham approached the campaign and said, hey, this guy's a rapist, he's a terrible guy, and he is associated with the campaign, which he was. He's been a big Democratic booster for quite some time now. She said, this is a problem. If things get out in the open, if that connection gets too close, the campaign could be seriously injured. And it's understandable, and she's right. Well, apparently the campaign didn't listen to her objections. So she said again, she spoke again, reached out to the campaign one more time in 2016, no reaction. Well, that's interesting. She really, really wanted to protect the Hillary campaign, and I understand why. She's a liberal. Hillary's a liberal. Also, this was a glass-shattering moment. The glass ceiling could come down if Hillary Clinton was elected president. We got it. Understood. So what else she got, Miss Feminist Lena Dunham? Well, apparently, it seems like nothing. She certainly didn't raise the red flag about Weinstein's behavior all these years, either before or after talking to the Hillary campaign. So here's one of Hollywood's biggest, most vocal feminists who didn't do much of anything, if anything at all, to help her fellow starlets avoid the clutches of Harvey Weinstein. It's amazing. It was part of this particular story from the New York Times, but no one else, to my knowledge, picked it up. It's been a couple weeks now, and I've been I always check the news voraciously. I've certainly the entertainment press as well. I don't see it. I just can't believe that this is not a bigger story. Of course, it's not the only big story that should have gotten much bigger out of that New York Times expose. Another problem was that CAA, one of the biggest talent agencies in Hollywood, also was implicated in the Harvey Weinstein situation because, according to the article, at least 8 of their talent agents knew what was going on, at least part of what was going on with Weinstein, and they still escorted Scarlett's into his clutches in a variety of ways. That's even more amazing. Now, a talent agency is supposed to protect the client, serve the client's best interest, and certainly not putting the client's health or safety in harm's way. Did they do that? Quite possibly. That's what the story alleges. That's the reporting that's on the record now. So had there been story upon story about the CAA activities, about what they were doing? I haven't seen any. There's been little to no outrage about it. Why? Well, maybe the press is too busy reporting on every other Trump slam from Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel and not actually focusing on stories like this. It's a huge story. It's a tragedy, and there's not nearly enough focus about it. That's media bias in the very worst of ways. You could also call it media incompetence.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Now it's time for a new HitCast feature, the Celebrity Tweet of the Week. This week's honor goes to Ice Cube, the rapper turned movie star, who recently blasted the proposed GOP tax cut. How? Well, let me read you the tweet, the censored version. The bull blank tax cut in a nutshell. Take the money from the people. Give it to corporations so they can produce more stuff that the people now have no money to buy. Hashtag good luck with that S. Well, I'm looking forward to Professor Cube's next econ class. Are you? My hit tip of the week is Paul Williams, Still Alive. The 2012 documentary catches up with one of the 70s most popular performers. Boy, I remember seeing him everywhere in the 70s. He was in movies and TV shows, lots and lots of game shows as well. He wrote some great songs, including my personal favorite, The Rainbow Connection. I gotta say, I choke up every time I hear that darn song. It's a thing of beauty, and who cares if it's a Muppet singing it? But what happened to him? He was all over the place, and then he disappeared. Why? Well, we find out why in the documentary. The usual reasons are included here, but what's interesting about the documentary is not so much getting to know Paul Williams again and his music and getting to meet him as a person, but it's also the film director. He's kind of obsessed with Paul Williams and sort of kind of stalks him throughout this particular presentation. Now, the documentary captures that. Maybe that was performance art writ large, but I have to say it makes a traditional film documentary that's sort of steeped in pop culture a little bit into a creepy affair, but it just makes it all the more interesting and arresting. You can stream Paul Williams Still Alive right now on Amazon Prime. Now let's get to my chat with Roger Simon. He's a screenwriter behind movies like Bustin' Loose, Scenes from the Mall, and Enemies, a Love Story. That film earned him an Oscar nomination. He's also a celebrated mystery author and the co-founder of PJ Media, formerly Pajamas Media, one of the earliest new media sites and still going strong today. He's a pretty fascinating fellow. I've been following him online for quite some time, and I'm really tickled pink to get a chance to talk to him and find out more about his film history and also his thoughts on modern media today. Here's my interview with Roger Simon. I wanted to start our conversation, Roger, talking about your early days as a Hollywood screenwriter, and I was kind of curious, when you look back at that era, what were your sharpest memories, and how did the real experience of Hollywood match what you thought you might expect? I mean, I think everyone has a different interpretation of what they'll see in Hollywood, and you were there. How did it kind of come together?
Well, my original experience of Hollywood was a very different Hollywood. I sort of came in at the tail end, late 60s, early 70s of the old Hollywood, which was, I have to be frank, and maybe this is, your listeners can put this down as nostalgia, one hell of a lot more fun. and also, more creative in a weird way. I mean, My first job in Hollywood was working for a producer named Charles K. Feldman, who he was also a manager and involved in producing such things as The Big Sleep and Casino Royale. And I would sit in his living room, which was he was a very rich guy in Beverly Hills, surrounded by Rouaults and other, fantastic paintings worth millions, while he would be on the phone in old-style Hollywood saying, "I got a kid here writing a script for me, good for you and your girl." He would be talking to Warren Beatty. I was all of about, and his girl was Julie Christie. I was all of about 23 or 4, and I was sort of like, it was an out-of-body experience. He'd be talking to Billy Wilder on the other line, and I had actually at that point when he hired me, I had not only never written a screenplay, I had never actually seen one in its true format.
So he kind of took a chance on you, that sounds like.
Yeah, he took a chance on me because I had written this novel called Air, which had a lot of dialogue in it, and he liked the dialogue. It was actually made into a movie by other people called Jennifer on My Mind that was just a terrible movie. But the novel, actually, looking back on it, was a kind of gritty George Simenal style thing, and I would have made a good film. Actually, at one point, it was going to be optioned by Hitchcock, and I went, "Holy moly!" I was just a kid, but there was a kind of looseness to the whole thing that was, I think, actually much more creative than it later became as everything became more corporate and simultaneously, ironically, more left-wing, even though I was very left-wing at the time. I mean, I was, hanging with Tom Hayden, so that's left.
I was looking at some of the movies you worked on and you're working on Woody Allen and Richard Pryor. I don't know if you got a chance to meet them directly, but when you think about the big stars from that era, they're all very different. I mean, Woody Allen and Richard Pryor couldn't be any more different. But was there something that united them? Was there something kind of a through line to their personalities that helped to make them be so successful?
Well, I worked with them both directly. In fact, Pryor quite a bit. I went on the road with Pryor and actually wrote a little bit of his stand-up, which he never used. Because he was spontaneous. He'd say, "Hey, that's pretty good," and then he'd write it down, and then he'd never use it. But it was a fascinating experience. I mean, he was the most creative man I think I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a few that were pretty creative. Zdersky was certainly creative, and Woody is weird but very creative. The truth is that Pryor was a really nice guy, a fantastic guy. I often think about how he would deal with today's rise in racism, because racism was less then. I mean, Pryor was not the slightest bit racist. I mean, he'd joke about it all the time in ways that we would not consider PC now. But he was not. He didn't care whether I was white, black, or whatever I was, And he was just a sad guy because he had the drug issue, and I had to do drugs with him actually in order to get his confidence.
That's quite a job requirement.
Yeah. No. Well, he lived in this kind of interesting ranch out in the San Fernando Valley, and he gave me his office to work in on the Universal lot at the time. And the Universal lot at those days was a pretty wild place. The bungalow where I worked then was right next to the Cheech and Chong bungalow, so you can imagine what that was like. I mean, let's put it this way: in this era of Me Too, hashtag Me Too, they would have exploded that place.
Wow.
I mean, it was one boob-ridden girl walking in and after the other. I mean, I was way over my head, so I didn't go in. but it was like quite a spectacle, I'll tell you, when you get a contact high about a half a mile long.
I want to I think you kind of hinted at this, sort of looking at those experiences compared to what you see in Hollywood today. Obviously, a lot has changed. It's more corporate. There's more technology. The franchises and tentpoles rule. When you look at Hollywood today, what are the good changes, and what are the really bad and ugly changes you can kind of mention?
No good changes.
Wow. Okay.
Virtually none. I mean, it's less creative, it's more buttoned up, and it's more boring. And the truth of the matter, most of the good stuff is everybody knows it's cliches being done in television now. Uh-huh. Okay, I know I'm a member of the Academy, and so I get all the movies at this time of year. They come streaming in like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, to your house. And I don't watch them mostly. I mean, I don't know why they're made. I don't know what they are. I don't really care about them because the movies in the old days were a group experience where everybody go to the movies, mm-hmm. and there was some kind of a communal thing in the era of The Godfather or Lawrence of Arabia. There's nothing like that being made now. Nothing. I mean, I'm sorry to say that to you as a film critic. It's not being made like it's part of the zeitgeist. I mean, people are stuck in their homes. I mean, the 50-inch television screen has its pluses and minuses. It's a nice object to have, and it makes television viewing vastly better. But you don't go out, so you don't have a collective human experience of seeing these things together, which made the movies what they were.
Yeah,
and so there's less interest in it. And then what I watch now is, I'm sort of into The Crown. I think it's very well made and written and acted and everything else. And so I watch that, but I won't watch the movies so much. And I think that's sad because movies were a great thing. And the theater in its old days was a great thing because everybody went to see, even back in the days of Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams, they went to the theater together and moved the culture. I think it's gone. And so, but maybe I'm just some old guy who's saying it was better then, and.
Well, so I talked to a lot of people about moviegoing and their habits, and it's, of course, anecdotal, but a lot of people tell me across the spectrum, I just don't go to the movies that much anymore. And there's a variety of reasons why. So I certainly don't think you're alone. One of the things
I know, and also, what we're dealing with, of course, is so many distractions, including, what we're doing right now. That's not to say it's bad. It's just that there's so much.
Yeah.
So the movies used to dominate. Now they're just another thing. But the loss of that is that there's not a kind of central thing to the culture anymore. It's like it's so dispersed that I think we all suffer from ADD. I'm like right now I'm writing a novel. I had dual careers in novels and screenwriter, and the best way for me to get something seriously made as a film now would be to write it as a novel and get recognition. Because otherwise they don't know what it is, I'm finding it's hard to write sometimes because I spend so much time writing these 800-word or whatever articles for the internet that may be usually successful in internet terms, but they're short bursts. Mm-hmm. They're things I do, in half an hour sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's not the same thing, and it's hard to focus on a real piece of writing.
Huh, that's interesting. One of the many reasons why I wanted to talk to you is I want to get your take on this particular question, which I've been hearing about and tracking for years, how conservatives are treated in Hollywood. Now, it feels like once a year, a legitimate organization like a LA Times will do, oh yeah, there's bias against conservatives in Hollywood, and then it ends there, and there's no sort of repercussions and anything. From your perspective, what is the status from people you talk to, from sort of how you've been sort of within the industry for a long time? Is it getting worse, and why isn't there more outrage over it?
Yes, it's getting worse, but outrage would mean nothing. Why isn't there more? Because the kind of suppression that goes on is covert. It's not like the old blacklist where where names were named and there was a list and so forth. Now it's they don't want you in the room with them because they don't want to be threatened in their own thoughts. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for people like me because I hate to sound like a victocrat because I think that's a terrible approach to life, but it's hard for me because I have to walk into a room with, in my instance, people usually much younger, and shut up and just talk about the weather or whatever, and try to stay away from anything political. But of course, they want to go into ever since the Bush era, all they want to talk about is how bad the right is. But most of them are vastly uneducated politically. I mean, if you would never find a studio executive who read Hayek or even knew who he was. I mean, they don't know anything.
Yeah. Are there exceptions? Are there people, even if they're liberal, in Hollywood, who you kind of think, I've heard them speak. They're pretty smart. They're pretty plugged in. They get it, even if I don't agree with what they're saying.
Not much. I mean, ironically, the person, but I was more on the left at the time, who knew the most about politics in terms of reading about it, was Warren Beatty. I mean, first of all, I think this is one of the problems with leftists. As a former leftist, I can say is they don't know who we are. They know who we know who they are a lot better than they know. I know leftist politics inside and out. I mean, I've read Mao's on contradiction when I was young.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest
they don't know about it. They haven't even read Milton Friedman. They don't know what it is because they don't want to. I mean, they've already dismissed it. So this translates into Hollywood in a big way because if you're not part of that, and there was this, there's this Friends of Abe organization, but you go to their meetings, and I've certainly gone to a number, and there are not that many people in the room who are really working. Or have worked very much. I mean, especially among writers and directors, interestingly, because that's where the discrimination is stronger, because they're the ones who actually create the stories.
So it's not a talent situation, like they're lacking the talent. It's just it's the opportunities.
Well, it is a talent situation too, because if you don't get to practice, your talent doesn't improve. Yeah. I mean, also, but I think most of all, and I've written about this, it's a business problem because the business people on the right stay away from the arts completely, except for, sponsoring the Philharmonic or something. But Beethoven doesn't really need help. So, I mean, Beethoven's a genius beyond anybody in Hollywood, to put it mildly. So he's been there and done that. So they don't sponsor the arts today at all. They're nervous about it, and that they've essentially ceded the playing field. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's more their fault than anybody else. And I've said that to them, but they mumble.
Yeah, you've been pretty vocal about the not being in line with the Academy voting process, and we're a few weeks from the nominations being announced. When you look at the Oscars, are there steps that could be taken to improve the telecast, to improve the culture as far as our respect for the Oscars? I mean, if you sort of wave a magic wand.
No, because the Oscars just reflects Hollywood, mm-hmm. And all those things that come in and out, like, Oscars so white and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure this year it's going to be the women thing till we're dead. But it's just reflecting the zeitgeist. And you can't, without changing the zeitgeist, you can't change the Oscars. Mm-hmm. But by the way, as older I get, the less I'm for awards. I don't love awards. Even though I was nominated for an Oscar, it was a big thrill. But, and yeah, sure, I'd like to win one. Mm-hmm. But, awards are, who wants to watch people get awards unless you're one of the people getting one?
Unless you have a rooting interest, yeah.
I mean, I don't watch the Emmys. I mean, why? I mean, is that a way to spend your time watching people getting prizes? I mean, please.
Well, I'm speaking with Roger Simon, the Oscar-nominated Hollywood screenwriter, novelist, and, of course, co-founder of PJ Media. Roger, you created PJ Media at a time when bloggers were mocked and ridiculed by mainstream journalists, and now it seems like there's a gaffe of major proportions almost every week, maybe even every day when it comes to Trump. What's going on with journalists today where they seem to, A, be so mistake-prone, and B, they don't seem to care that their cachet has fallen so dramatically. I mean, if I was a journalist covering the news, I'd be scared to death. I'd be constantly trying to up my game. I feel like they're the opposite.
Yeah, well, I think it's Trump derangement syndrome gone to the nth power. I mean, they think they are the owners of the true truth, which is beyond the truth. It's Trump's bad, therefore anything we do to get him is okay, even if it's a big lie. And the truth of the matter is that what that does is it clouds the brain to such an extent they don't even see their lies. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these recent ones that have been coming up, which are very common now, they're essentially a product of blindness, because there's so much rage and nutsiness going on in their brains when they sit down to read and write that they don't see reality in front of them at all. They see just an enemy. They're in bunkers, like, it's World War I, and they're not writing something. They're hurling grenades.
Yeah.
So, you don't stop in World War I to wonder whether you hit someone or not. Let's just keep going.
I cover entertainment news. I've done that for a while now, and I never really covered hard news, but I see the bias infecting the Hollywood coverage as well, and to me, it seems worse than it's been in the past. Do you track that, sense that, and is it sort of a product of the Bush-Trump era, or were there other things in play?
And I track that. And, I occasionally, Hollywood Reporter calls me up or emails me and say, "Would you like to make a statement as a Hollywood conservative? Would you like to make a statement on yada yada yada?" Uh-huh. And very frequently, I do not, because I feel I'm just being set up for some kind of bullying. and of course, I'll talk to you because I read your writing and you're a sensible person. But and also I know I won't be manhandled. But in the regular Hollywood press, I've done it. But I'm very careful and circumspect about it, because I know it's I'm being used as cannon fodder essentially. And, there are only a very small handful of people they reach out to, because there's just not that many people whose names have name recognition. And, then except for the, big major movie stars who happen to be on the right, but they keep their mouths shut for the most part, except for James Woods, obviously, who is one of the leaders of Twitter these days. And good for him.
In the past, when you've been sort of mistreated by the press, what form does that take? Is it misquoting? Is it sort of putting it in a different context?
It's more the context thing. It's more the context thing. And I don't. But I mean, look, I have a pretty decent voice myself, and having been on top of the Drudge Report this morning, I probably have a bigger voice than most people in that area of the press. So I'm not complaining about that. I mean, I really think that it's more. What's more important is a fair creative voice, because in actuality, when you sit down to write a movie or a novel or something creative, not a news story or an opinion piece, you're writing something that theoretically should be much more complex and nuanced than just an op-ed. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're afraid of hearing from people who do have that. Although it's one of the interesting things it's worth noting is that I think the two most respected playwrights in the English language today are on the right. And I'm talking of Stoppard and Mamet. I think Stoppard particularly is a world-class writer of extraordinary abilities, and he's a libertarian, quite clearly.
Obviously you played a role in the growth of new media with PJ Media. Where do you think it stands today in the age of Trump? I feel a lot of conservatives have been critical of some new media outlets. Obviously, nothing is immune to that kind of criticism. But what are sort of the pluses and minuses of new media as we head into 2018?
Well, I don't think there are too many pluses, and I think the most. If you're going to go to so-called conservative websites, whether it's Breitbart or PJ Media or Daily Caller, I think they're all fine. I mean, they have different biases and so forth. Just as it's okay to have, left-wing media. I have nothing against the Daily Kos or whatever they are, or Huffington Post. They exist, and as Chairman Mao said, let 100 flowers bloom, But social media itself is more dangerous, I think. I'm talking about Twitter and Facebook and so forth, because the power inherent in that is more suspicious and dangerous, and Google too. PJ Media, Daily Caller, and Breitbart are essentially more conventional outlets. They're essentially internet magazines which feature the writings of certain people who have certain biases. And you know what you're getting when you go there, just as you know when you go to the New Republic or the Nation what you're getting.
Okay.
I mean, unless you're an imbecile. And fine. And then you have the choice of evaluating it. Social media is the subject of woe, and particularly for young people, for college kids and high school kids, it's a real treacherous new world out there that's not happy, I don't think.
Yeah, I've got a 6 and an 8-year-old, and I'm absolutely dreading the moment they sign onto Facebook. So hopefully they'll be better by then.
I see it through. I have a 19-year-old daughter, and I've seen a lot of this, and she's very bright, and I've seen a lot of this through her eyes, and it's they have a tough time that we never did.
Yeah, it makes teen years even tougher. But I wanted to pivot back to Hollywood before we let you go. You recently wrote a column saying that President Clinton helped pave the way for the Harvey Weinstein revelation. And I wanted maybe to you can dig down a little bit for our listeners and just kind of share what you meant by that. Because it was a really interesting column, but I wanted to get your words on it.
Well, my sense of it is that the Weinstein revelation occurred at the very moment they were ready, the left was ready to defenestrate or kick out the Clintons. The Clintons' usefulness had ended. And therefore, the hypocrisy that went on for years that Trump was, and others on the right were awful, but Bill Clinton was okay, which is like an absurdity if you think about it, had outworn its usefulness. And they knew they couldn't go on. They couldn't go on to get Trump without doing that. So then who got dragged out at that particular moment but the boogeyman of boogeymen, Harvey Weinstein, who, everybody knew was awful, but few knew was that awful. Yeah. I mean, the idea of, masturbating into flower pots is a bit off the charts. Yeah. So then everything followed from that. I mean, that was the dam broke, and now we have Kevin Spacey, who would want to be in a room with the guy. So, and I never worked with either of those two people, but there are people there who've gotten, swept up in all this that I have worked with, and no one ever hit on me because why? But I it's interesting to see it, and it's quite epidemic. And, it's another, but it has had one good thing. Anyone who now takes the opinions of Hollywood people seriously politically, he ought to have his head examined.
Well, that leads to my last question. For years, Hollywood is getting more and more vocal toward election season. And then last year, it was all in, but Trump won. Does that mean that the Hollywood effect isn't what it used to be? Or is it just Trump is such a unique kind of character, all the rules don't apply?
All of that. But one other thing that's kind of interesting is in the old days of Hollywood, this is barely when I even arrived, the studio heads, by contract, banned public discussion of politics by the stars. And they knew something smart because the idea was they knew that by blabbing their whatever views they may or may not have had, they were alienating half the audience. Mm-hmm. These clowns don't seem to care, and they're paying for it. I mean, they really are. But, they deserve a lot of what they're getting. I mean, when you read, I mean, I knew Dustin Hoffman a little bit, but when I read what he did, I want to go, oh man, what kind of a guy are you? Jesus. I mean, look, the guy's a great actor. There's no question about it. But, whew.
Yeah.
Well, there's no excuse. I mean, this is like latter-day Henry VIII stuff. If, in the modern age, you can't be Henry VIII, but you can be a pseudo-Henry VIII.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right. Well, Roger, I really appreciate your thoughts on everything related to Hollywood. I appreciate your time. Of course, check out Roger's work at pjmedia.com, still contributing to the website. You are CEO Emeritus, am I correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, I'm glad you are still there in spirit and in body. And I hope we can chat again soon, maybe even after the Oscars when all the fallout is over, or maybe about some good TV shows, because I think you and I are a little bit more interested and engaged by them. But, Roger, it's a real pleasure to speak to you, and hope we can chat down the road.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.